Millionaire comes home early, catches stepmother kicking poor little girl begging for leftovers. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Great news awaits you. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble foyer as Marcus Wilson stepped through the mahogany doors of his Beverly Hills mansion. At 40, the tech mogul had built an empire worth $3 billion. But today felt different. The quarterly board meeting had ended 2 hours early, a rare gift that allowed him to escape the suffocating glass towers of downtown Los Angeles. His Italian leather shoes echoed against the polished floors as he loosened his silk tie. The house seemed unusually quiet for a Thursday afternoon. Victoria, his wife of 3 years, typically filled their home with the chatter of her social circle or the melodic tones of her piano practice. Instead, an eerie silence enveloped the 18,000-square-foot estate. Marcus paused at the base of the grand staircase, listening. Somewhere in the distance, he heard muffled voices coming from the direction of the kitchen. His brow furrowed. The household staff had Thursdays off, and Victoria rarely ventured into the kitchen unless absolutely necessary. Curiosity piqued. He moved toward the sound, his footsteps muffled by the Persian runner that lined the hallway. As he approached the kitchen's swinging doors, the voices became clearer. Victoria's sharp tone cut through the air like a blade, followed by what sounded like a child's whimpering. Marcus froze. They didn't have children, and Victoria had made it abundantly clear that motherhood wasn't in her plans. So why was there a child in their home? He pushed the door open just a crack, and what he saw made his blood turn to ice. Victoria, her perfectly styled auburn hair gleaming under the recessed lighting, stood over a small figure hunched on the black granite floor. The child, a little girl with matted blonde hair and clothes that had seen better days, was picking up scattered crackers with trembling hands. "You disgusting little rat!" Victoria's voice dripped with venom as she drew back her designer. "Heel. I told you never to come begging in my kitchen again." Her foot connected with the child's ribs, sending the fragile 8-year-old sprawling across the cold marble. A sharp cry escaped the girl's lips, but she immediately stifled it as if crying would only make things worse. Marcus watched in horror as his wife, the woman he'd exchanged vows with, the woman who smiled graciously at charity galas, raised her foot again. "Stop!" The word tore from Marcus's throat like a battle cry as he burst through the doors. Victoria spun around, her face transforming from cruel satisfaction to shocked innocence in milliseconds. The transformation was so swift, so practiced, that Marcus wondered how many times she'd worn this mask before. "Marcus!" Victoria's voice took on a honeyed sweetness that now sounded sickening to his ears. "Darling, you're home early. I was just dealing with a trespasser. This little vagrant keeps breaking into our property, stealing food." She gestured dismissively at the child, who had curled into a protective ball near the kitchen island. Marcus stepped closer to the girl, his heart hammering against his ribs. She couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds, her clothes hanging off her tiny frame like hand-me-downs from someone twice her size. Her face was hidden behind a curtain of dirty blonde hair, but he could see her small body shaking. Whether from fear, cold, or hunger, he couldn't tell. "Look at me, sweetheart," Marcus said softly, crouching down to the child's level. His voice carried the gentle authority he'd learned from years of mentoring young entrepreneurs, but something deeper stirred within him as he looked at this vulnerable little girl. Slowly, cautiously, the child lifted her head. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Despite the grime on her face and the fear in her expression, her eyes were the most striking shade of blue he'd ever seen, the color of sapphires touched by morning light. There was an intelligence there, a depth that seemed far beyond her. Years, and something else that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Annie," she stammered, her voice small but clearer than he'd expected. "Annie Parker. "I'm sorry, mister. I was just so hungry, and sometimes the delivery people drop things by the back gate, and I thought maybe no one would miss just a few crackers." Her words were carefully chosen, revealing an intelligence and caution beyond her years. Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle. "See, she admits she's stealing. I should call the police and have her arrested for trespassing and theft." She reached for her phone, but Marcus's hand shot out, grasping her wrist with gentle but unmistakable firmness. "No," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Annie's face. "We're not calling anyone." He turned back to the child, noting the way. She flinched when Victoria moved too quickly, the way her hands instinctively protected her ribs where the kick had landed. "Annie, how long have you been coming here?" Maybe 3 months. Annie's voice was uncertain, as if time had become fluid in her world of survival. "Since I had to leave Mrs. Rodriguez's place, she's been letting me sleep in her garage and giving me food when she could. But she got scared when some men in suits started asking questions about me." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a homeless child. Someone was actively searching for her. "Where is Mrs. Rodriguez now, sweetheart?" Annie's eyes darted to Victoria, then back to Marcus. The fear in her expression intensified, and she seemed to shrink even smaller. She said she had to go visit her sister in Mexico very suddenly, but before she left she told me about the nice house with the big kitchen where sometimes food gets thrown away. She said I should be very careful and only take what I really needed. The sight of this brave little girl trying to survive through the kindness of strangers while being hunted by unknown enemies broke something inside Marcus that he hadn't even known was fragile. Here was a child, 8 years old, the same age his daughter would have been if Sarah hadn't miscarried 9 years ago, living in the shadows, surviving on scraps, being kicked by his own wife for the crime of being hungry. "Victoria," he said, his voice carrying a deadly quiet that his business rivals had learned to fear, "go upstairs, now." "Marcus, you can't be serious. She's a little criminal. And if you show her kindness, she'll just keep coming back. We'll never be rid of her." Victoria's mask was slipping, revealing glimpses of the cold calculation beneath her beautiful facade. I said, "Go upstairs." Each word was measured, controlled, but carried the weight of barely contained fury. "We'll discuss this later." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger, but she knew better than to argue when Marcus used that tone. She'd seen him dismantle corporate opponents with less provocation. With a final venomous glance at Annie, she swept from the kitchen, her heels clicking against the floor like an angry metronome. Marcus waited until he heard her footsteps on the stairs before turning his full attention back to Annie. The little girl was watching him with a mixture of hope and terror, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone had just defended her. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently, noting the way she favored her right side. Annie shook her head quickly, but the slight wince when she moved told a different story. "I'm okay. I'm always okay. Mrs. Rodriguez used to say I was tougher than old leather boots." A ghost of a smile crossed her face at the memory, the first genuine expression Marcus had seen from her. Something about that brave little smile, about the way this child was trying to comfort him while she sat bruised on his kitchen floor, made Marcus's chest tight with emotion he hadn't felt in years. "Annie, I want you to listen to me very carefully, okay? You don't have to be tough all the time, and you never, ever have to go hungry again." The promise was out of his mouth before he'd fully thought it through, but as soon as he spoke the words, Marcus knew he meant them with every fiber of his being. This little girl, this mysterious Annie Parker with her sapphire eyes and heartbreaking courage, had just become the most important priority in his life. But as Annie's face lit up with cautious hope, Marcus had no idea that helping her would uncover secrets that would shake the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about his own family. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in his home office, staring at the business card Detective Maria Santos had left behind. The Beverly Hills Police Department had been surprisingly thorough in their response to his call about a missing child. But their findings only deepened the mystery surrounding Annie Parker. No record of any Annie Parker in the foster system. Detective Santos had explained, her expression troubled. No missing person reports matching her description. However, we did find records of a James Parker who died in 2016 in what was ruled an industrial accident. He had a daughter, but the child's whereabouts after his death are unclear. Now Annie sat curled in one of the oversized leather chairs, across from his desk, wearing one of Victoria's old sweaters that hung on her like a dress. She'd showered and eaten 2 full meals, but still seemed ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. In the soft light of his office, Marcus could see details he'd missed in the harsh kitchen lighting. A small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her fingers moved in complex patterns when she was nervous. And most remarkably, how her eyes tracked every detail of his office with an intelligence that seemed advanced for her 8 years. "Annie," Marcus said gently, closing his laptop. "Detective Santos told me that your father died in 2016. That would make you about 4 when it happened. Can you tell me what you remember about him?" The little girl's fingers stilled their nervous dance, and she looked down at her hands. "Daddy was the smartest person in the world. He worked with computers and made programs that could think almost like people. He used to read me stories about princesses and tell me I was his little queen." Her voice grew smaller. "After Mama died when I was 3, it was just me and Daddy. He taught me numbers and letters and how to be safe." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Annie, do you remember anything about the day your father died?" Annie was quiet for several moments, as if deciding how much she could trust him. Finally, she spoke. "Daddy had been scared for weeks. He kept moving us to different places, and he made me memorize important things in case something happened to him. The day he died, he gave me a special envelope and made me promise to keep it safe until I found someone who could help me when I was in real trouble." The mention of an envelope made Marcus's pulse quicken. "Annie, do you still have that envelope?" Fear flashed across her features. I hid it somewhere safe. Daddy made me promise to only show it to someone who could really protect me from the bad people. He said there were people who might try to hurt me if they knew I had it." "What kind of bad people?" Annie's voice dropped to a whisper. "After Daddy died, some people in suits came and said they were going to take care of me. But Mrs. Henderson, she was Daddy's friend who was supposed to watch me, she hid me instead. She said Daddy had been right to be scared, and that those people weren't really there to help. For 2 years she kept me safe and taught me things Daddy hadn't had time to teach me." Marcus felt a growing sense of unease. "What happened to Mrs. Henderson?" "She got very sick last year. Before she went to heaven, she gave me Mrs. Rodriguez's address and told me to find her if I ever needed help. Mrs. Rodriguez was nice, but she got scared when those men started asking about me again. That's when I started hiding and only coming out to find food. The picture Annie was painting was of a child who had been systematically hunted for years, protected by a network of adults who understood the danger she was in. Annie, these men who were looking for you, did Mrs. Rodriguez describe them?" Annie nodded gravely. "She said they wore expensive suits and had badges, but they weren't police. They asked about a little girl with blonde hair whose father had worked with computers. They said I was in danger and they needed to find me to keep me safe, but Mrs. Rodriguez didn't believe them." Marcus's protective instincts surged. The child had been living with the constant threat of capture for 4 years, since she was 4 years old, Annie, you've been incredibly brave, but I need you to know that you're safe here, and I'm going to make sure nothing bad happens to you. The office door opened, and Victoria entered with 2 cups of coffee, her earlier anger replaced by a mask of concerned civility. She'd changed into a soft cashmere sweater and had even applied a subtle amount of makeup, clearly preparing for whatever performance she felt the situation required. "I thought you might need some caffeine," she said sweetly, setting a cup on Marcus's desk, before settling into the chair beside Annie. The little girl immediately tensed, her body language, screaming danger even as Victoria smiled warmly. "And I wanted to apologize to Annie for my behavior earlier. I was just startled by finding a stranger in our home." Marcus watched carefully as Victoria turned her attention to Annie. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry if I seemed scary before. Sometimes grown-ups react badly when they're surprised. Do you forgive me?" Annie nodded quickly, but Marcus noticed how she pressed herself deeper into the chair, trying to create distance without being obvious about it. This child had learned to read dangerous adults, and every instinct was telling her that Victoria was a threat. "Annie," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false maternal warmth, "Marcus tells me you've been living on the streets. That must have been so frightening for a little girl. I think the best thing would be for us to call social services and get you into a proper home with a nice family." "No!" The word burst from Annie with such force that both adults were startled. Her face had gone pale, and she was gripping the arms of the chair with white knuckles. "Please, no. The people who are looking for me, they might be watching the official places. Please don't call them." Marcus saw something flicker across Victoria's face, satisfaction, quickly hidden behind concern. "But sweetheart, you can't live on the streets. It's dangerous and illegal. The authorities don't need to do anything." "Right now," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying clear authority. He could see the panic in Annie's eyes, and something deeper was bothering him about Victoria's sudden interest in involving social services. Earlier, she'd wanted to call the police to have Annie arrested. Now she was playing the concerned citizen. The shift felt calculated. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus, we can't just keep her here. We're not licensed foster parents, and there are legal implications." "Let me worry about the legal implications." Marcus stood up, moving to the window that overlooked their manicured gardens. In the reflection, he could see Annie watching him with desperate hope while Victoria's mask was slipping enough to show her irritation. His phone buzzed with a text message. "Detective Santos, Mr. Wilson, discovered some irregularities in James Parker's death investigation. File was sealed unusually quickly. Can we meet tomorrow? This case may be more complex than initially thought." Marcus stared at the message, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind. Annie's father had worked in technology and died under suspicious circumstances. She'd been hidden away and was now being pursued by people who weren't official authorities. And Victoria, his own wife, seemed awfully eager to get rid of. The child, despite her performance of concern. "Annie," he said, turning back to face her, "I want you to know that you're safe here tonight. No one is going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. Tomorrow, we're going to figure out the truth about what happened to your father and why those people are looking for you." Relief flooded Annie's features, but Victoria's expression darkened. "Marcus, this is ridiculous. You can't just—" "What I can and can't do in my own home is my decision," Marcus said quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Annie will stay in the guest room tonight. Elena can pick up some proper clothes for her tomorrow." He looked directly at Victoria. "I trust that won't be a problem." Victoria's smile was now purely surface, her eyes cold as winter. "Of course not, darling. Whatever you think is best." But as she stood to leave, Marcus caught the look she shot at Annie, a look of calculation that made his blood run cold. After Victoria left, Annie remained silent for several minutes before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Marcus, your wife doesn't like me very much, does she?" Marcus knelt beside her chair, looking into those intelligent blue eyes. "Some people have a hard time understanding what it means to help others, sweetheart. But I promise you, nothing bad is going to happen to you while you're in this house." Annie studied his face with an intensity that was unnerving in someone so young. "Daddy used to say that promises are sacred things, and you should never make one unless you're prepared to do everything you can to keep it. Are you prepared to do everything you can to keep your promise to me, Mr. Marcus?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. This 8-year-old child was asking him to commit to protecting her with everything he had, and the terrifying thing was, he realized he already had. "Yes, Annie, I am." She nodded once, as if his answer had satisfied some internal test. "Then I think it's time I showed you what Daddy left for me. Because I think those bad people might have found me again, and if something happens to me, somebody good needs to know the truth." As Annie reached into the inner pocket of the oversized sweater and pulled out a carefully sealed envelope, Marcus had no idea that the contents would reveal a connection to his own family that would change everything he thought he knew about his past, his wife, and the true reason why an 8-year-old girl had been marked for disappearance. The envelope trembled in Annie's small hands as she held it out to Marcus. It was yellowed with age and had been carefully protected in a plastic bag. Marcus accepted it with the reverence of someone handling a sacred artifact, understanding instinctively that this represented the last connection between a little girl and her father. "Daddy made me memorize everything inside in case something happened to the letter," Annie said quietly. "He was really scared near the end. He kept checking the locks and looking out the windows. He said powerful people were trying to steal something that belonged to our family." Marcus carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The letterhead read, "Parker Technology Solutions, Innovative Security Systems," and the date made his blood run cold. March 15th, 2016. Just 2 months before James Parker's death. The handwriting was precise, the words of a man who knew he was running out of time. "My dearest Annie, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am no longer able to protect you. I pray that whoever has this letter is someone who can help you understand the truth about who you are and why dangerous people want to hurt our family. I need you to know that everything I'm about to tell you is real, even though it will sound impossible. Your mother was not Susan Martinez, as I told Mrs. Henderson. Your real mother's name was Catherine Wilson, and she was the daughter of one of the richest families in California. When she was 19, she fell in love with me, a nobody from a working-class family. Her father, Richard Wilson, threatened to disown her if she didn't end our relationship." Marcus's hands began to shake as he read. Richard Wilson had been his father's name. The timeline was right. His father had died in 2018, 2 years after this letter was written. But Marcus had never heard of any sister named Catherine. Catherine chose love over money, and we were secretly married in 2015. When you were born in January 2016, we were the happiest people on earth. But when you were 8 months old, Catherine discovered something terrible about her family's business. She found documents proving that Wilson Industries was built on stolen patents, embezzled funds, and covered-up industrial accidents that killed dozens of workers. She copied everything and planned to expose them, but someone found out. They poisoned her, Annie. My beautiful wife was murdered by her own family to keep their secrets safe. I managed to grab you and the evidence and run, but I've been hiding ever since." Marcus felt the room spinning around him. Catherine Wilson. He had a sister named Catherine who had disappeared when she was 19. His father had told him she died in a car accident in Europe. that her body had never been recovered. But if this letter was true, the evidence Catherine gathered is hidden in a safety deposit box at First National Bank on Wilshire Boulevard. Box number 247. The key is sewn into the lining of your stuffed rabbit, the one your mother made for you before she died. Annie, this evidence doesn't just prove your mother was murdered. It proves that Richard Wilson stole the technology that made his fortune from multiple inventors, including your great-grandfather, Thomas Parker. You are not just Catherine Wilson's daughter, my darling girl. You are connected to both the Wilson fortune and the Parker legacy. But most importantly, you are loved beyond measure, and nothing they do to try to erase you will ever change that. Trust no one connected to the Wilson family until you can verify their intentions. They killed your mother, and they will kill you, too, if they discover you're still alive. Find someone with the power to expose the truth and the courage to fight for justice. All my love forever, Daddy. The letter fluttered to the floor as Marcus's numb fingers lost their grip. He stared at Annie, really looked at her for the first time, and saw it now, the shape of her nose, the determined set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. She looked like Catherine. She looked like his sister. Mr. Marcus? Annie's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Marcus staggered backward, his legs giving out as he collapsed into his desk chair. The revelation hit him like a physical blow, and suddenly memories he'd buried came flooding back. Catherine laughing as she taught him to ride a bike when he was 6. Catherine defending him from neighborhood bullies when he was 8. Catherine crying in his arms the night before she supposedly left for Europe, whispering that she wished she could tell him the truth about why she had to go. She never went to Europe, Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. She was hiding from our father. She was protecting you. Annie watched him with those heartbreakingly familiar blue eyes, Catherine's eyes, as understanding dawned in her young face. You loved my mama very much, didn't you? She was my best friend, Marcus managed through the tightness in his throat. She was only 2 years older than me, but she always acted like my protector. When our mother died, Catherine was the one who held our family together. She made sure I did my homework, taught me to tie my shoes, sang me to sleep when I had nightmares. Tears he hadn't shed in years began streaming down his face. When Father told me she'd died in that car accident, I wanted to die too. I spent years wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have saved her. Annie slipped down from her chair and approached him cautiously, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm. Uncle Marcus, you couldn't have saved her from those people. Daddy said they were too powerful, too evil, but maybe you can save me now, and that's what Mama would want. The simple wisdom in her words broke something loose in Marcus's chest. Here was this extraordinary little girl, his sister's daughter, his blood, his family, comforting him while she faced mortal danger herself. The courage Catherine had shown in choosing love over wealth lived on in her daughter, and Marcus felt a fierce surge of protective love unlike anything he'd ever experienced. You're right, sweetheart. I couldn't save Catherine, but I'm going to move heaven and earth to protect you. He knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. But I need you to understand something very important. The woman upstairs, Victoria, she's not just cruel. If what your father wrote is true, she might be part of the same organization that killed your parents. Annie's expression grew solemn beyond her years. I know. I could tell from the first moment I saw her that she was like the bad people who took me from Mrs. Henderson. She has the same cold eyes, the same fake smile. Daddy taught me to recognize dangerous people by watching how they look at children. More like we're problems to be solved instead of people to be loved. The maturity in her observation chilled Marcus to the bone. This 8-year-old had learned to survive by reading the intentions of adults who saw her as a threat to be eliminated. Annie, how long have you known that you were in danger because of who your parents were? Always, she replied matter-of-factly. Daddy started teaching me about staying hidden and being careful when I was 4. He said someday I might need to be invisible for a while, and that I should always remember that being smart was more important than being brave, but being kind was more important than being smart. Marcus marveled at the wisdom James Parker had instilled in his daughter, and at the way Annie had internalized lessons that had kept her alive through months of unimaginable hardship. Your father sounds like he was an extraordinary man. He was the best daddy in the whole world, Annie said with quiet conviction. He used to say that love was the only thing in the universe that got stronger when you shared it, and that's why the bad people could never really win. They only knew how to take things away, but good people knew how to give things away and somehow end up with more than they started with. The philosophical depth of the conversation struck Marcus as surreal, discussing the nature of love and evil with an 8-year-old who had lived through more trauma than most adults could survive. Yet Annie's insights were profound, her understanding of human nature sophisticated in ways that both amazed and heartbroken him. Annie, I want you to know that even though we just found each other tonight, you're already the most important person in my life. I know that might sound impossible, but it doesn't sound impossible, Annie interrupted gently. Daddy always said that family love doesn't follow the same rules as other kinds of love. He said, when you recognize someone as family, really recognize them, all the love that was always meant to be there just appears all at once, like it was waiting for the right moment. Marcus felt his heart expand with an almost painful intensity. This remarkable child understood love and loss and family bonds with a clarity that humbled him. Is that what happened when you showed me the letter? You recognized me as family? Annie nodded seriously. I could tell you were a good person when you stopped Victoria from hurting me. But when I saw how much it hurt you to read about Mama, I knew you weren't just good, you were family. Family people hurt for each other even when they barely know each other. The sound of Victoria's voice in the hallway made them both freeze again. But this time her words were different, urgent, almost panicked. What do you mean the target has made contact? How could she possibly have found him? Victoria's voice carried a note of fear that Marcus had never heard before. No, you listen to me. If she's shown him the evidence, everything changes. We need to move to containment protocol immediately. Marcus and Annie exchanged glances, both understanding that whatever window of safety they'd had was rapidly closing. Victoria wasn't just his wife. She was an active participant in the conspiracy that had destroyed Annie's family. Uncle Marcus, Annie whispered, I think I need to get my stuffed rabbit, the one with the bank key, because if we're going to fight the bad people, we're going to need that evidence Mama and Daddy gathered. As Marcus realized that the battle for truth and justice was about to begin, he understood that he was facing the most dangerous enemy possible, one who had lived in his house for 3 years, shared his bed, and had spent all that time waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But now, with Annie by his side, he finally had something worth fighting for that was more valuable than any empire. Family. Detective Santos arrived within 20 minutes, her unmarked sedan pulling quietly into the circular driveway. Marcus met her at the front door, Annie close behind him, clutching a small backpack they'd hastily packed with essentials. The detective's experienced eyes immediately assessed the situation, a powerful man protecting a vulnerable child from an unknown threat. Mr. Wilson, you sounded urgent on the phone, Detective Santos said, stepping into the foyer. Her attention immediately focused on Annie, and Marcus saw recognition flicker across her features. This is the child we discussed earlier. Detective, we have a situation that's much more complex than either of us realized. Marcus ushered them into his office, closing the door firmly behind them. Annie has shown me evidence that suggests she's not just a missing child, she's the target of a conspiracy that goes back years. Over the next hour, Marcus laid out everything they'd discovered. James Parker's letter, the connection to Catherine Wilson, the overheard phone conversation revealing Victoria's true allegiances. Detective Santos listened with growing alarm, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions that revealed her years of experience with complex cases. "Mr. Wilson," she said finally, "if what you're telling me is true, this child isn't just in immediate danger. She's sitting on evidence that could bring down some very powerful people. The safety deposit box your brother-in-law mentioned could contain proof of crimes spanning decades." Annie had been sitting quietly throughout the conversation, but now she spoke up. "Detective Santos, there's something else, something I haven't told Uncle Marcus yet." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn, stuffed rabbit, carefully opening a hidden seam in its belly. "Daddy hid this inside my rabbit so the bad people would never think to look for it." A small silver key fell into her palm, followed by a tiny digital recorder that looked like it had been modified for concealment. Marcus and Detective Santos leaned forward as Annie turned on the device. James Parker's voice filled the room, speaking in urgent, frightened tones. "Day 43 of surveillance. The Wilson security team made contact with Mrs. Henderson today. They're getting closer. Annie, if you're listening to this, it means they found me. Use the key to get the evidence from the bank. Trust no one except someone who proves they loved. Catherine." The recording continued with more entries, documenting months of being hunted, narrow escapes, and James Parker's growing fear that his time was running out. But most chilling were the voices he'd captured of his pursuers, including one that made Marcus's blood run cold, Victoria's voice, clear and unmistakable. "The target has a child. Eliminate both the father and the girl. We can't afford any loose ends that might lead back to the Wilson family." Detective Santos looked at Marcus with professional sympathy. "Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your wife has been actively involved in hunting this child for years." And he nodded gravely. "She's been watching your house, Uncle Marcus. When Mrs. Rodriguez got scared and had to leave, I didn't know where else to go. I thought maybe if I was very careful and only took little bits of food, nobody would notice me. But she saw me the very first day." "Why didn't she just—" Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. "Because you're important," Annie said with the matter-of-fact wisdom she'd developed through years of survival. Daddy's recordings talked about how the Wilson family always tries to look innocent. If something happened to me when you weren't around, she could say she never saw me. But if something happened to me after you found me and cared about me, people would ask questions." Detective Santos was already reaching for her radio. "I'm calling for backup and protective custody. If Victoria Wilson is part of an organized conspiracy to eliminate witnesses." The office door burst open, and Victoria stood in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury. Behind her were two men in dark suits, their hands resting ominously inside their jackets. "I'm afraid that won't be necessary, Detective Santos." Marcus instinctively moved in front of Annie, his mind racing. "Victoria, what are you doing?" "Cleaning up a mess that should have been handled years ago," Victoria replied, her voice devoid of the warmth and sweetness she'd always shown him. "Did you really think an 8-year-old brat could waltz into our lives and destroy everything we've built?" Detective Santos was slowly reaching for her weapon, but one of the suited men shook his head in warning. "I wouldn't, Detective. We have the house surrounded, and several of your colleagues are currently being detained for their own safety." "Who are you people?" Marcus demanded, though the sick feeling in his stomach told him he already knew the answer. "We're the people who've been protecting the Wilson family legacy for 3 generations, the man replied When Richard Wilson built his empire, he understood that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made to protect what matters most. Your father was a visionary, Marcus. It's unfortunate that you lack his pragmatic nature. Annie pressed close to Marcus's back, and he could feel her small body trembling. But when she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. You're the ones who killed my mama and daddy. Your parents made poor choices, Victoria said coldly. Catherine chose to betray her own family, and James Parker refused to disappear quietly. They brought their fates on themselves. And now? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Now we're going to finish what we started 8 years ago. Victoria's smile was chilling. There's going to be a terrible accident tonight, a gas leak in the guest wing, where a homeless child unfortunately perished while trespassing in our home. Detective Santos will tragically be found nearby, apparently overcome by the fumes while investigating a break-in. And you, darling Marcus, will be discovered unconscious but alive, the sole survivor of a terrible tragedy. The casual way she described their murders made Marcus's blood freeze. You've been planning this the entire time. I've been planning this since the day I married you, Victoria admitted. Did you really think it was coincidence that a beautiful, sophisticated woman fell in love with the grieving widower heir to the Wilson fortune? Richard handpicked me to ensure the family secrets stayed buried. When Catherine's daughter turned up alive, well, eliminating her became my primary mission. Marcus felt Annie's small hand slip into his, and the trust in that gesture gave him strength. You made one mistake, Victoria. What's that? You assumed I was as heartless as my father. At that moment, Marcus pressed a button on his desk that few people knew existed. A silent alarm connected directly to the FBI field office in Los Angeles. It was a security measure he'd installed years ago when Wilson Industries had become the target of corporate espionage, but he'd modified it. Recently, after Detective Santos had suggested federal involvement might be necessary, Victoria's eyes narrowed. What did you just do? I activated a dead man's switch I installed this afternoon, Marcus said with grim satisfaction. Every conversation in this room for the past 3 hours has been recorded and automatically uploaded to a secure server. If anything happens to any of us, the recordings get released to every major news outlet in the country. The suited men exchanged worried glances, but Victoria's composure never wavered. You're bluffing. Am I? Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a security app with multiple green lights. FBI Field Office, LA Times, Washington Post, 60 Minutes. They'll all receive copies simultaneously if my heart rate stops or if I don't check in every hour. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Victoria's face, but before she could respond, the sound of vehicles screeching to a halt outside filled the air. Through the office windows, they could see black SUVs surrounding the property, and tactical teams taking positions. FBI, everybody down. The next few minutes were chaos. Victoria's men reached for their weapons, but were immediately overwhelmed by federal agents pouring through every entrance. Victoria herself made a desperate attempt to grab Annie, screaming that the child couldn't be allowed to live. But Marcus threw himself between them, taking a vicious blow from one of the bodyguards before the man was tackled by agents. When the dust settled, Victoria and her accomplices were in handcuffs, and Agent Rebecca Morrison, the FBI's lead investigator on organized crime, was taking statements from Marcus, Annie, and Detective Santos. Mr. Wilson, Agent Morrison said, based on the evidence you've provided and what we just witnessed, we have grounds for a comprehensive investigation into Wilson Industries and its connection to multiple unsolved murders. We'll need Annie to testify eventually, but for now, she'll be in protective custody until we can guarantee her safety. Annie looked up at Marcus with those striking blue eyes, and he saw fear there, not of Victoria or the criminals, but of being separated from the only family she had left. Uncle Marcus, are they going to take me away from you? Marcus knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his. Annie, I made you a promise, remember? And I meant every word of it. You're not going anywhere without me. He looked up at Agent Morrison. I'd like to petition for emergency custody. Annie is my blood relative, and I'm prepared to provide her with a safe home while this investigation proceeds. Agent Morrison studied them both, seeing the bond that had formed between the billionaire CEO and the orphaned child. Given the circumstances and the family connection, I think that can be arranged, but you'll both need to relocate temporarily until we're certain all the threats have been neutralized. As they prepared to leave the mansion that had been Marcus's home for years, Annie tugged on his sleeve. Uncle, Marcus, are we going to be okay? Marcus looked around the house that had harbored so many secrets, at the legacy of lies and murder he was about to help dismantle, and then at the brave little girl who had trusted him with the truth. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay. We're going to be a family. But as they walked toward the federal vehicles that would take them to safety, Marcus knew that the most challenging part of their journey was just beginning, proving the extent of the Wilson family crimes and ensuring that Annie could claim her rightful inheritance through legal channels rather than violence. 6 weeks later, Marcus sat in a hotel suite overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching Annie work on a tablet computer with quiet determination. The federal investigation had progressed rapidly once they'd gained access to James Parker's safety deposit box, but the evidence they'd found there had stunned even the seasoned FBI agents. Catherine Wilson hadn't just discovered financial crimes. She'd uncovered a massive industrial espionage operation that had stolen patents and innovations from dozens of companies over 3 decades. Wilson Industries' entire technological foundation was built on theft, and the evidence she'd gathered before her death was comprehensive enough to trigger criminal charges and civil lawsuits that would take years to resolve. But perhaps most remarkably, they'd discovered that James Parker hadn't just been a victim of the Wilson family's crimes. He'd been a technological innovator whose work had been systematically stolen and rebranded as Wilson Industries products. While the legal battles would be complex, preliminary assessments suggested that Annie, as James Parker's heir and Catherine Wilson's daughter, had legitimate claims to significant compensation. Uncle Marcus, Annie said, looking up from her tablet with excitement. I think I figured out how to access one of Daddy's old computer programs. The FBI agents said they found encrypted files on his work computer, but I remembered something he taught me about passwords. Marcus moved to sit beside her, marveling again at her remarkable memory and logical thinking. In the weeks they'd been together, he'd watched her demonstrate problem-solving skills that were genuinely exceptional for an 8-year-old, though thankfully within the realm of plausibility for a child who had been taught advanced concepts. From an early age, show me what you found, sweetheart. Annie's fingers moved carefully across the tablet screen, navigating through what appeared to be a basic educational program. Daddy always said the most important things should be hidden, where bad people wouldn't think to look. He made this look like a math game, but if you solve the problems in the right order, it opens something else. The screen shifted to reveal what was clearly a more sophisticated interface, still simple enough for a child to navigate, but containing what appeared to be an extensive database of information. This isn't just a game, is it? Not exactly. It's Daddy's record of everything that was stolen from him, and from other people too. He said that someday, if anything happened to him, this information might help someone prove the truth. Annie's voice grew quiet. He also left messages for me here, so I would remember that he loved me, even if he couldn't tell me anymore. As the program loaded, Marcus felt his chest tighten. The screen displayed a methodical record of innovations that he recognized as the foundation technologies for Wilson Industries' most profitable products. Communication systems, security protocols, software algorithms, all of it documented with original patents, development timelines, and proof of prior invention that predated Wilson Industries' development of the same technologies by months or years. Annie, this is extraordinary. This proves that much of Wilson Industries' fortune was built on your father's stolen work. There's more. Annie navigated to another section of the program, and suddenly the screen filled with video files that James Parker had carefully recorded. Daddy documented everything. Every time someone threatened him, every conversation about his work being stolen. They spent the next hour watching footage that documented years of systematic intimidation and theft. Richard Wilson personally threatening James Parker, Victoria meeting with corporate security personnel who would later hunt Annie. Most importantly, a recording from just days before Catherine's death, where she confronted her father about the murders and cover-ups, only to have him calmly explain that she and her family would need to be permanently silenced if she didn't abandon her investigation. This evidence doesn't just prove the financial crimes, Marcus realized, with growing excitement. It provides clear motive and premeditation for the murders. Annie, this could put the entire conspiracy behind bars for life. A knock at the door interrupted them. Agent Morrison entered, followed by a man Marcus didn't recognize, distinguished, gray-haired, wearing an expensive suit that spoke of serious legal expertise. "Mr. Wilson, Annie," Agent Morrison said, "I'd like you to meet Thomas Crawford, senior partner at Crawford, Hutchins and Associates. He specializes in intellectual property law and complex inheritance cases." Crawford shook Marcus's hand before kneeling down to Annie's level with practiced ease. "Miss Parker, I've been reviewing your case, and I have some encouraging news. Based on the evidence the FBI has gathered, along with what you've just shown them from your father's archives, we can build a strong case for significant financial compensation." Annie looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," Crawford said gently, "that when all the legal proceedings are finished, you'll be entitled to compensation for the work that was stolen from your father, plus damages for what happened to your family. While the exact amounts will take time to determine, we're likely talking about a substantial settlement." Marcus felt relief wash over him. "You're saying Annie will be financially secure?" "More than that," Crawford replied. "Given the scope of the theft and the documented damages, she'll likely receive enough compensation to ensure she never has to worry about money for the rest of her life. However, I want to be clear, this will be through legal settlements and court judgments, not automatic inheritance of Wilson Industries' assets." Annie was quiet for several moments, processing this information with the same thoughtful intensity she brought to everything else. Finally, she looked up at Marcus. "Uncle Marcus, does this mean the bad people can't hurt us anymore?" "That's exactly what it means, sweetheart. You're not just safe now. You'll have the resources to help make sure no one can hurt other families the way they hurt ours." Agent Morrison smiled. "There's one more thing, Annie. We found something else in your father's safety deposit box, something personal that I think you should have." She handed Annie a small, wrapped package. Inside was a jewelry box, and nestled in the velvet interior was a delicate necklace with a sapphire pendant that perfectly matched Annie's eyes. "Your father left a note saying this belonged to your mother, and that she wanted you to have it when you were old enough to understand what it represented." Agent Morrison's voice was gentle. It was her grandmother's necklace, a family heirloom that had been passed down through generations. Annie held the necklace up to the light, watching the sapphire catch the sunlight streaming through the hotel windows. "It's beautiful, but Uncle Marcus, I don't want to wear it yet." "Why not, sweetheart?" "Because Mama wore it when she was fighting the bad people, and now it's my turn to help fight them. I want to wear it when we go to court and tell everyone the truth about what they did to my family." Annie's voice carried a determination that was remarkable for her age. I want to wear it when we make sure they can never hurt anyone ever again." Marcus felt pride swell in his chest as he looked at this extraordinary little girl who had already survived more trauma than most adults ever faced, yet still possessed the courage to seek justice rather than revenge. "I think your mother would be very proud of that decision." As they prepared for the legal battles ahead, Marcus reflected on how much their lives had changed in just a few weeks. Annie was thriving under the care of specialized tutors who could challenge her exceptional abilities while helping her process the trauma she'd experienced. More importantly, she was learning to trust again, to believe that the world contained good people who would protect rather than exploit her. But for now, in this quiet hotel room overlooking the ocean, Marcus watched his niece work on puzzles that would challenge most teenagers and marveled at the journey that had brought them together. A family that had been torn apart by greed and murder was finally being reunited, and a little girl was discovering that sometimes justice and love were indeed the same thing. The most dangerous phase of their fight was over, but the work of rebuilding and healing was just beginning. 6 months later, Annie stood in the marble lobby of the federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles, wearing her mother's sapphire necklace and a navy blue dress that Marcus had bought specially for this day. At 8 years old, she was about to become the key witness in one of the largest corporate fraud and murder cases in California history. The weeks leading up to the trial had been intensive, but hopeful. Annie had worked with child psychologists and legal advocates to prepare her testimony, while Marcus had collaborated with federal investigators to unravel the full extent of the Wilson family crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Decades of stolen patents, covered-up accidents, and systematic elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the truth. "Are you ready for this, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, adjusting his own tie nervously. Over the past months, their bond had deepened from protective uncle to devoted father figure, and Annie's adoption papers had been finalized just weeks earlier. She was now officially Annie Parker Wilson, bearing both her father's name and her new family identity. "I'm ready," Annie replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Daddy always said that the truth is like water. It finds a way to flow around any obstacle and reach where it needs to go. Today, the truth is going to flow all the way to everyone who needs to hear it." Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh approached them, flanked by the legal team. "Annie, remember what we practiced. Just tell the truth in your own words, and don't let them intimidate you. You're very brave to be doing this." "I'm not really brave," Annie said thoughtfully. "Uncle Marcus taught me that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing, even when you are scared. And I'm doing this for Mama and Daddy, and for Mrs. Henderson, and for all the other people who got hurt." As they entered the courtroom, Marcus was struck by the number of people present. Media representatives filled the gallery, along with FBI agents, other families of victims who had come forward during the investigation, and corporate whistleblowers who had found the courage to speak out once the case became public. Victoria sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her beauty now harsh and cold, without the mask of civility she'd worn for so long. When her eyes met Annie's across the courtroom, there was no warmth, no remorse, only the cold calculation of someone who viewed an 8-year-old child as an obstacle to be eliminated. When Annie was called to testify, she walked to the witness stand with perfect composure, placing her small hand on the Bible and promising to tell the truth with a solemnity that impressed everyone present. For the next hour and a half, she recounted her story with remarkable clarity and precision. She described her parents' love, her father's growing fear in the weeks before his death, the terrifying years of being hunted, and her months of survival with the help of kind strangers like Mrs. Rodriguez and Mrs. Henderson. When prosecutor Walsh showed her the photographs of the men who had stalked her. Annie identified each one with calm certainty. But the most powerful moment came when Walsh played selected recordings from James Parker's hidden archives. As Annie's father's voice filled the courtroom, describing the systematic theft of his work and the threats against his family, Annie sat perfectly still, tears streaming down her face, but her voice never wavering as she confirmed the events. He described, when Victoria's defense attorney began his cross-examination, he attempted to confuse Annie with complex questions about timelines and technical details. But Annie met each challenge with remarkable composure, often correcting the attorney's own misstatements while maintaining her simple, honest responses. "Miss Parker," the defense attorney said in a patronizing tone, "you were only 4 years old when these alleged thefts began. How could you possibly remember events from so long ago?" Annie looked at him with those striking blue eyes that had first captured Marcus's attention months ago. "Sir, I remember a lot of things from when I was 4 years old. I remember the songs Daddy sang to me, and the way Mama's necklace sparkled when she wore it, and the day Daddy started teaching me how to stay safe." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "When important things happen to people you love, you remember them. Children understand more than grown-ups think we do." The attorney, visibly frustrated by his inability to shake her testimony, made a crucial error. "Miss Parker, isn't it true that you're only telling this story because you want money that doesn't belong to you?" For the first time during her testimony, Annie's composure shifted, not with tears, but with a flash of righteous indignation that reminded everyone present that she was Catherine Wilson's daughter. "Sir, my mama and daddy are dead. Mrs. Henderson is dead. I spent months hiding and being scared because those people wanted to kill me too. Do you think any amount of money is worth that? Do you think I would make up stories about watching my family die just to get rich?" The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the defense attorney seemed stunned by the raw pain and honesty in her voice. "I don't want money because it will make me happy," Annie continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I want justice because that's what Mama and Daddy would want. I want to make sure that other little kids never have to hide in alleys, because powerful people think they can hurt anyone who gets in their way." When Annie finished her testimony and returned to Marcus's side, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The prosecution rested its case, and 4 days later, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts on all counts. Victoria and her co-conspirators were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 8 months after the trial, Marcus stood in the garden of their new home, a comfortable estate in Malibu, where Annie could have privacy to heal while accessing excellent educational opportunities. The legal proceedings had concluded with Annie receiving a settlement that would ensure her financial security for life, though the exact amounts remained confidential to protect her privacy. But more importantly, she was thriving. Her adoption by Marcus was complete, making their family bond both legal and emotional. She was working with gifted education specialists who could challenge her exceptional abilities while still allowing her to experience the childhood she'd been denied. "Dad," Annie called from across the garden, where she was working on a science project with the focused intensity she brought to everything she loved. "Come look at what I built." Marcus smiled at how naturally the word "Dad" came now. He walked over to see her latest creation, a simple but ingenious device designed to help elderly people reach high shelves safely, inspired by her memories of Mrs. Henderson's struggles. "I was thinking," Annie said, looking up at him with those remarkable blue eyes that now sparkled with hope instead of fear, "maybe we could use some of the settlement money to help other kids who are lost in the system like I was. Kids who are smart but just need someone to believe in them." Marcus knelt down beside her, marveling once again at her enormous heart and brilliant mind. "I think that's a wonderful idea. What did you have in mind?" "A foundation, the Parker Wilson Foundation for Lost Children." We could build safe places for kids to stay and hire people who actually care about helping instead of just making money. Annie's face lit up with enthusiasm. And maybe we could work with police departments to help find missing children faster, so no one has to be scared and alone as long as I was. You know what, sweetheart? I think your parents would be incredibly proud of who you're becoming. Annie touched the sapphire necklace she now wore every day, a reminder of the mother she barely remembered, but whose courage lived on in her daughter. I hope so, but mostly, I just want to make sure that love wins over greed, and that good people don't have to be afraid of bad people anymore. As the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Marcus watched his daughter work on her invention with the same determination she brought to everything else in her remarkable life. He thought about the night he'd first found her in his kitchen, hungry and desperate, and marveled at the journey that had brought them both to this moment of peace and possibility. Annie Parker Wilson had survived the worst that powerful people it could inflict, had faced down her family's killers with courage that humbled seasoned law enforcement officers, and had emerged from trauma with her heart not hardened, but expanded. She was living proof that sometimes the smallest person in the room can change everything, and that love and justice were indeed the same thing. The little girl who had once searched for scraps in a billionaire's kitchen was now in a position to help feed hungry children around the world. The child who had been marked for death by a criminal conspiracy was now protected by the full power of the law and surrounded by people who would give their lives to keep her safe. But most importantly, the orphaned 8-year-old who had once believed she was completely alone in the world had discovered that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love and protect each other, no matter what storms may come. In the end, Annie had found more than justice for her parents, murders, and more than compensation for her family's stolen legacy. She had found something that no amount of money could buy and no criminal conspiracy could destroy. She had found home. And as Marcus Wilson Parker watched his extraordinary daughter dream of ways to help other lost children find their own homes, he knew that the best investment he'd ever made wasn't in technology or real estate or corporate acquisitions. It was in believing that a hungry little girl deserved love, protection, and the chance to change the world. The fight for Annie's life and legacy was over. The fight to honor her parents' memory and help other vulnerable children was just beginning, and both Marcus and Annie knew that this new fight would be the most important and rewarding battle of their lives.